Good morning and welcome to Talking Point here on WESN, the content capital. My name is Keaton Shaw. It is Tuesday, the 12th of April 2022. It is a short week, but though that may be the case, there is a lot to talk about, as I indicated yesterday morning when introducing the program. This morning we will be joined by three guests. That is economist Dr. Roger Hosein from the University of the West Indies, as well as a former government minister and member of Parliament, Minister of Planning under the People's Partnership, Dr. Bowendradat Tiwari. He's also the former principal at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. And we will also be joined by our regular commentator, Ms. Karen Yunus-Teixeira. She's a former Minister of Finance and attorney at law, or if we can just wrap that up into one, an intellect, as I like to put it. But as we have those conversations this morning, and we will be introducing our guest very shortly, let me introduce my co-host, colleague, and good friend who is alongside me, Mr. Sean Michael Small. Good morning, Sean.
Good morning, Keaton. And with regards to the discussion we're going to have today, it's a very interesting time we're in. And I do wonder to what extent, because we said this last year, just look back to the 80s, there was a similar situation occurred. We had issues due to the price of oil. We said diversification. Then the price came up, everything was fine, and we forgot about it. Now, it hasn't quite worked out that way. There's a lot of external pressure coming to bear, and I do wonder if people don't realize when it's internal, when it's because of something we've done. You know, sure, we could blame whoever's the cause. When it's external, yes, you could respond to it. But when you've already been in trouble and you're still in trouble and you're looking at recovery, I do wonder if it's fair, the extent of the criticisms, because you have to ask, well, what exactly are we expecting to be done that will magically save us from everything when we already don't have much to begin with?
I think, to answer your question, you can never expect miracles to be performed, especially when it's in relation to economics. You can always hope for the best. As you pointed out, when we look at the 80s, you know, there was the entire conversation of diversification. At one point, there was a boom. We seem to have forgotten about that. And then there were also the struggles associated under the NAR government. People label it as struggles, but in the years after the NAR government were no longer in office, I think those were 5 years of the best growth Transvago has ever experienced. And I think overall, what you have to look at is that, yes, there are external shocks, there are external pressures, but those external shocks and pressures are only compounding the policy or the lack of policy from the economic standpoint internally. And a prime example of that is that a recent IMF report stated that our currency is overvalued. And we have not actually even made a deposit into the Heritage and Stabilization Fund since 2013. But we've had 4 withdrawals since 2016.
Right, but those things in and of itself is not really driving cost of food, right? So it's just, I do wonder to what extent is the problem so large that we don't realize just how much of a bind we're in. The long-term cause, unfortunately, we could attribute blame for the long-term cause, but you can't change long-term problems in the short term and expect results for the most part. So I'm wondering, you know, how much of it are we really asking for miracles when we should really be willing to try to accept the course corrections that we could take now? But unfortunately, either way, there's going to be some pain to be felt. Certain amounts of it is going to be unavoidable.
And I think with that, you've said it in the best way possible. You cannot expect to solve long-term situations with a quick fix. It's not something that you can just easily resolve with short-term fixes. But that is the thing. I cannot say that I am entirely impressed with currently where we're at, and I cannot say that I'm entirely hopeful for where we're heading, because though the Minister of Finance indicated that there was $5.5 billion in growth in the third quarter of 2021, Between July and September, we saw 5.5 billion. Unfortunately, it does not necessarily translate into the wider economy. He spoke of the construction industry, for example, that it grew by 100%. But he did not give figures. And I say that because if it is that you are expanding in terms of the number of projects that you're doing, I know that basic economic theory says that in order for economic development to take place, sometimes they look at your construction levels, your infrastructure, to rate it and to grade it. And if you are expanding projects, but you're unable to actually pay for those projects, and I go back to certain situations in which there's so many contractors that still owed money, some have actually had to cut crew and staff because of that, then that does not paint the entire picture in its entirety. So you're right, we need to be patient, but at the same time, are we seeing anything that we should be hopeful for and we should be patient for?
Here's another trick about growth. If we start from the bottom, anything upwards is growth, no matter how small. 100%, you could have less than 0.5% of something, and if you double that, you've grown by 100%.
But also stating that something has grown by 100%. Almost 100% growth. Exactly what does that mean? 100% growth from where?
That's my point. Growth is growth, that's fine. But if we're still well under previous levels, then we're not out of the woods. We're going in the right direction, sure. But it's not a big deal, right? If most of the houses in a city burn down and we have 2 left and you build 2 more, well, we've increased houses by 100%, but most of the city is still burned down. It'll take a lot longer to alleviate the full extent of the problem.
So utilizing that analogy, have we actually sought to try and actually clean up the burning city and rebuild it? Or have we just remained in a position where we're hoping for the best, but expecting the worst?
I wonder to what extent it's another analogy where, the emperor wears no clothes and not everybody is willing to admit it.
I'm sorry, when you said that, I thought you were referring to the analogy of the Prime Minister's socks. Forgive me.
No.
Anyway, folks, so very shortly we will be joined by our guest this morning. We're going to take a quick break here on the program, and when we return, well, we'll introduce them to you and we will start the discussions. We're going for the full hour this morning because, as expected, there is quite a bit to analyze and get into for us, not only in this seat, but you, the viewer, to have a better understanding of the situation that we're in and the position where we're at and heading to. Stay tuned to Talking Point here on WESN, the Content Capital.
Okay, so we just who?
Say hello to the newest way to access eye care support. Say hello to Ferrera Optical Virtual Care. For the first time in TNT, you can now connect from the convenience of your home with our team of eye care professionals online. Need guidance in a vision problem or adapting to new eyewear? Book a virtual visit via FerreraOptical.com using our smart scheduler, and we'll take care of the rest. Ferrera Optical Virtual Care, connecting with you wherever you are.
We have been apart for a long time. Now let's get together once again. Let's welcome you back. Family. North Coast Jazz 2022, May 27th to 29th. Born here, played here.
People really want to know, what about me? Where do I fit?
Yes.
What is in the ride for me in terms of a better Trinidad and Tobago? And I'm pleased to shed some light on that.
The purpose of bail is to ensure your attendance at court. That's it. It is not punitive, it is not rehabilitative.
We, the police officers, we are professional, and we are here for whenever the survivor is ready to come forward.
We have the right to private and family life, the right to religious freedoms and beliefs and thoughts and expression. But these rights are not absolute. Certain rights can be limited.
The law is to govern the whole, it's for all of us in public.
on set to two very lovely dispensing opticians from Optometrist today. We have Yusra and we have Kyla.
For blue light, an interesting fact is 15 minutes exposed to the sunlight equals 12 hours on our screens.
What's up, Doc? Tuesdays and Thursdays here on WESN, Content Capital.
On the next episode of We Comedy Jam.
Searching bags, they're looking all over for this thing all over. But I know they was searching in vain because the girl that took my virginity left early now. The man stepped forward when I watch as a man in a T&Tech uniform. Man walk up to my candle, watch me in my face, say lights out mean lights out, and blow out my candle. I like to think like T&Tech have a blow out candle department.
We Comedy Jam, Mondays at 8 p.m. only on WESN Content Capital.
If you live with someone who's tested positive for COVID-19 and has to self-isolate at home, take care of them from a distance and reduce their movement around the house. Give them space, a designated space, and open those windows. If you have to be in contact, mask up, both of you. If you work, stay home from work and don't go out, not even to the grocery or pharmacy. And remember, no visitors allowed. Limit the contact to limit the spread.
The Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross Society. Mission-based, people-focused, community-driven.
Welcome back to Talking Point here on WESN. Now joining us via Zoom are our three guests this morning. First, let me introduce a staple, somebody who has been with us since the beginning, Ms. Karen Nunes Teixeira, former Minister of Finance and Attorney at Law. Good morning, Karen.
Good morning to you, Keaton and Sean, and to your guests, who I have become very familiar with. And have a lot of respect for their opinion on what is going on with the economy. And so I'm sure your viewers are going to benefit a lot from today's discussion.
Well, we certainly look forward to that discussion. Also with us is Dr. Roger Hossain. He's an economist at the University of the West Indies with a specialty focus on international trade. Good morning, Dr. Hossain.
Morning, everyone.
Welcome back to the program. And also with us is Dr. Bhuvaneswar Tiwari. He is the former principal at the University of the West Indies. He is also a former member of Parliament and former Minister of Planning. He's held many portfolios, and well, to introduce him with all of that, we might not have enough time in this program. So Dr. Tiwari, good morning and welcome.
Morning. Thank you for inviting me, and I am happy to be in the company of your other guests, Karen and Roger. They are very capable people.
Well, Dr. Tiwari, thank you for joining us. And as we start off this discussion, I'd first like to ask Dr. Roger Hossain, I know that you've indicated before that Trinidad and Tobago, it's no longer sustainable for the government to keep the subsidy on fuel. Now, what we've seen is a partial adjustment as described by the Minister of Finance. Arguments have been made by one particular economist yesterday on this program that it was ill-timed, considering that we've just come out of lockdown and businesses are starting to find their ground again, their levels again. This, unfortunately, would have been ill-timed. He's not against the removal of the subsidy, but do you think that this is trying to relieve pressure on the government in order for them to balance their budget? And by doing that, it will obviously be a bite to the citizens.
Oh, we have a situation in the Trinidad and Tobago economy where, as we all know, transfers and subsidies are about 28 billion. This government, in particular, we have spoken out strongly against them about the need to control strong transfers and subsidies and so on. I fully agree with the minister on this transfer and subsidy intervention. I think the timing is appropriate in the sense that when do you cut? And because we have been wanting to cut so many things for so many years, and we just keep moving the can down the road, down the road, down the road, so that our stock of reserves are now down to about 6.2 billion or thereabouts. And there is something called the brute reality. Now, I didn't like some of the other comments that the minister made in terms of nominal GDP growth and whatnot. Some of that, it is pure politicking. But as concerns being direct and focused on removing some further aspects of, if you will, subsidy, I think it shows the intent on some degree of structural adjustment. Now, people don't like to use that word in Trinidad, but the facts are that the government has been structurally adjusting. They have changed fuel subsidy maybe about 3 or 4 times since 2015. Government expenditure has been cut from 63.4 billion down to 52 billion. And there are areas that they have intervened and made changes in order to try to bring an alignment between government expenditure and government revenues. The gap is still large. And I think the announcement benefit and the signaling benefit as we open of, listen, we all have to row in the same direction is critical. Now, the argument by others that the timing is an issue is an argument that can be made at many points in time. But when will growth really return to this economy of a magnitude that would allow you to make deep changes? If you look at the IMF report, and I never look at the writing in the report. In fact, I look at that second or third. I always look at the data in tables 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Because sometimes it is my view that the IMF tries to write up things in a nice, diplomatic, professional manner. So I am not into that. I just look at the data. And the data tells me everything I want to know. It tells me that growth in 25, 26, and 27 is going to go back to one of the top worst performances in the world in terms of it will go back to 1 or 1.5% or thereabout. And when we get those type of growth performances, if you know the data, you would see we are normally ranked in the top 35 or top 30 worst performing economies in the world. I don't want that for my country. So let us fix the economy now so we can make nonsense of those numbers in the future. This is not to say that fixing the fuel subsidy now wouldn't make it tough for all, you know. But at the end of the day, when you have natural gas production at 2,800 MMCF per day, and it was 4.1, I believe, in 2010. That's a sharp decline. When you have crude oil production around 60,000 barrels per day, and you know it was significantly more before, you know you are in an economy where you have to make changes. And whilst the Minister of Finance comes in often for heavy criticism on this one, I back him. And the timing is now or never. I see this economy at a sharp crossroad. It has no time to stand up and polish the rim and the tire and everything else. We need to move. And in that regard, as tough as it might be, I appreciate the April 19th boundary, and there will be ripples in the economy in terms of prices. Food prices are also high. The state would have to design a counter strategy in terms of helping the poorest and most vulnerable. But we have to fix. And so I have no issues with the April 19th point.
Let me just actually, with that, now come to Dr. Tiwari, because, and I'm going to give Karen the chance after to respond, because Dr. Tiwari, what Dr. Hossain is stating is that, and Dr. Hossain has been stating this for quite some time actually in relation to the term structural adjustments. It seems as though we're afraid of that, but in terms of transfers and subsidies, we do need to see a decrease in expenditure there. But you've also indicated that what we're seeing right now is wages are stuck, prices increasing for everything, I know the unemployment rate grew to 5.1%, if I'm not mistaken. That's according to the IMF. So individual householders are losing control of their financial and economic lives. Do you agree with what Dr. Hossain is stating, or do you share different opinion in relation to that? Because yes, though this may be for the long term, what are we going to be seeing, and what are households going to be experiencing in the short term?
Yeah, well, the truth is that we've been postponing things and decision making for so long that we are caught up in a situation where everything has kind of bunched up and we have multiple challenges coming together. So at one level, at the most basic level, you have the Minister of Finance and the government dealing with the issue of income, expenditure, deficit, trying to get us to live within our means, and we've been not been able to do that because we've been living on deficits since about 2009, I think. And then you have a situation at another level where you have a structural problem in the country in terms of production and in terms of the structure of exports. But the structure of your production and the structure of exports determines the level of dependency that you have on any one or small range of products. And it also determines the balance of trade and the balance of payments, which determines the amount of foreign exchange that you have. And then we have a debt problem, which has been growing. And we now have a situation where the debt is equal to the foreign reserves. And basically, we have a worry as to whether we are going to have enough foreign exchange, and which is depleting every year. And we have a problem in which, as it depletes, you worry about whether you're going to be able to feed yourselves. And secondly, you have a problem whether you're going to be able to pay your debt. Now, when you have these three sets of problems, the income and expenditure deficit issue, the structure of production and exports issue, and the foreign exchange crisis, and the debt problem, you have all of these things. The question is, since we've postponed for so long and avoided making decisions, what do you do now? And I think that is where I have a little concern, because in my view, you can't do any one thing that will solve the problem. What you have to do is to figure out what are the range of things, the cluster of things that you are going to do, in what kind of sequence, over what period of time, in order to get this thing right. And in order to do that, you have to explain that to people and make them understand, because we are living in a situation now where everything is up, but salaries are stuck. Mm-hmm. And as you correctly said, as Dr. Hossain says, people are losing control of their financial and economic lives. And everyone in this society who is involved in some kind of business or in control of any kind of power structure has leverage. The government has leverage because it can do things, make decisions. Mm-hmm. The private sector has leverage because they can make decisions. People who buy and sell have leverage because they can make decisions. But the only individual, the only set of persons who have no leverage are people who are stuck on fixed incomes, or people who do not have any income, mm-hmm. or people who have limited income. So it's really the poor, the itinerant worker, and the full-time worker whose wages are stuck at a certain level, who are finding a great difficulty now in living. So that is why I say, yes, we have to make some decisions, but it cannot be any one decision in isolation. It has to be an understanding of how the decisions are made, how they're going to be sequenced, how they're going to impact on each other, and a general discussion with the population to understand how the burden of adjustment going forward is going to be shared. Because we have a reduced per capita income in the country by almost 25%. And we have a recession going on now for almost 7 years, which means that the economy itself has shrunk. And the challenge now is how to get back, first of all, to recovery, and then to growth.
Yes, yeah.
And with growth, jobs, income, and individual and family sustainability. And then with the growth, some capacity for sustainability of the economy and the country as a whole.
Well, Dr. Tiwari,
and my problem with the Minister of Finance and the governmental decision making is that we do not understand where the individual decisions fit into a medium or long-term plan.
Yes.
And I would stop at that point.
Well,
let me just add something for Dr. Tiwari and for Karen. The Minister of Finance said that GDP at the end of 2021 is going to be close to 170, which brings it back close to peak income of 177 in 2014. So when you say per capita GDP is down, Dr. Tiwari, I am just throwing it out in the middle now that the Minister of Finance is basically saying, well, things is back to normal. But I'm not back to normal, you know. Things are back to the height of economic activity in Trinidad and Tobago. So I'm not giving an opinion. I'm just telling you what he said, and probably somebody could comment on it.
Well, Karen,
well, just make a quick response before Karen responds, and that is that the growth that the minister is talking about might be correct, but it's based on a cyclical good fortune, which is the very high price of oil and natural gas now. There is no guarantee of that being sustained over the long term, over many quarters and over many years. So the recovery is not in terms of GDP and getting back to 2014 level. The recovery is only one of revenue and income, which could fall in the morning with the price of oil and natural gas. That's all I would say for now, and I'm sure Karen has a lot to say.
Karen, I know that you've had to remain silent while Dr. Hussain and Dr. Tiwari has had the floor, but the floor is all yours.
Yes, well, that was okay because we learned a lot from both of them. I would want to just start with the first comment from Dr. Hussain. Yes, it is never a good time, and if there was a time, it's now when revenues clearly have increased. And as Dr. Tiwari did say, it's exogenous to us. It's nothing that the government has done to create this increase in revenue. And, you know, there's nothing that they have done. I know you talked about cutting their expenditure and so on. But, for example, the minister, as I understood him to say, that the construction industry was quite booming. Well, that is not what the economic bulletin of January 2022 said. The inflation rate is 3.6, which is a bad thing because it says that the economy is sluggish. The repo rate has stayed at 3.5. The reserve requirement, which is a percentage of the bank's liabilities, has cut significantly. It's because nobody's spending, because no one has confidence, because the government has not given any alternative. And it is only because oil and gas prices have increased significantly. And it appears that the idea of the green revolution is quite away from if the Ukraine-Russia special operations clearly show that with all the talk of the European Union, they still require 40% of their natural gas, and Russia is still a major producer of oil. So we know that the days of fossil fuel are far from over. And that's why we have Biden calling President Maduro, and having to pull back from that and having to release over 1 million barrels of oil per day for the next 6 months. So all the indicators, and Shell all of a sudden, in my view, Dutch Shell in Trinidad being able to overcome its technical difficulties to increase production. So whilst initially the issue was the prices were high, production wasn't there, it seems that everybody has woken up, and there have been articles in the papers which based on data that production is increased. So the good news has nothing to do with what the government has done. The good news is exogenous to the government. I would support, and I do support that, and by the way, Dr. Hussain, you may be correct me on this, but my understanding has been, and I pointed to an article that had been written by, anyway, I wouldn't call the name, but that transfer and subsidies include any transfer from the consolidated fund, including to the infrastructural development fund. So transfers are also used for capital projects. It's not just for subsidizing a lifestyle. And what I would like to say is that if the inflation rate has gone up year on year to 3.5, and most of the increase in inflation is food inflation, and the construction industry is also a major contributor, then what you're going to see across the board, people's purchasing power is going to even be more affected. And as Dr. Tiwari said, it's not the people at the top. They have the procurement legislation, they have the gambling legislation. I don't think people understand the implications of those pieces of legislation to protect the interests of the wealthy and to keep the poor exactly where they are. So you might find, ironically, an increase in subsidies because of the impact of the increase in fuel, which will impact on the cost of transportation and whatever. What we should be doing, and what we should have been doing all along, and what Dr. Tiwari mentioned, this is no miracle. This is not something that came up on a sudden. How long have you been hearing the word diversification? Let's take that word away. We need to increase our food, our export. And we've got many opportunities to have done that. I mean, failed. 86% of our food is imported. What the kind of things I see in the supermarkets, what are we doing importing those things? Why aren't we going down the value chain and exporting? Why doesn't the government come forward, not only with all those studies upon studies and collecting dust? Why don't they start implementing? If they gave people the SMEs, a real option for the agro industry, for culture in a real cohesive way, that would then be saying that we're not only taking away something, we're giving you something. But what you're doing is by taking away something, you increase in price. Tech just got an award from, I wouldn't call it an award, from the industrial court, and they got 0, 0, 0. So I don't know how you can look at the increase in the dollar, which is removal of fuel subsidy on one hand, without any compensatory work being done on the other hand to deal with the improving our economic situation. It's not their doing, they didn't cause it. And by the way, there are countries who have done it. Mauritius is one. They have done it, and in a very short period of time, because they read the writing on the wall. They are very similar population to ours. I'm not even going to use Singapore. And clearly, Ghana has the right idea to learn from our mistakes, not to take all the oil money and kick it down the road, but to create agro-industry and to create things. So I'm not impressed, bottom line.
Dr. Hussain, I'd like to bring you back into the discussion now because this is so much to unpack. But alongside me is my co-host colleague, Sean Michael Small. And Sean, one of the things that we've mentioned is that IMF report from earlier this year, which Dr. Hussain has described as chilling.
Well, so I do have to ask, because even though the Minister of Finance says, well, GDP is going to go up. So statistically, yes, GDP per capita will go up. But I think the point was either indirectly said or alluded to that actual wages, the average wages, or wages across the board, for the most part, outside of the oil and gas sector, are probably not going to be impacted. So with the price of food what it is, because we have long-term problems, we understand that. structural issues, as you all have spoken to. But then, as Karen started to point out, there's current and immediate issues with the price of food in particular. And people seem to be expecting that the government should be able to do something about the price of food. So I am wondering, I suspect a lot of these transfers and subsidies that we are trying to get rid of was because of the same situation. The GDP is driven by oil and gas, but it's not trickling down to everybody. Could the government potentially be tempted to find just a different transfer or subsidy in order to trickle down this new GDP windfall to alleviate the problem? Because a lot of people expect the government to wave a wand and deal with the cost of food. Don't mind it's coming from a lot of it, not all, but a lot of it from external factors.
I think Dr. Tiwari was very spot on in the way he dealt with the response earlier. This is a difficult economy. And we have a situation in which we have to fix, just a minute. To fix many moving parts one time. And one of the things we have to be clear about is that the economy is bloated. So that we inflated transfers and subsidies and government expenditure to a level that was unreasonable and was unrealistic. And the ratio of transfers and subsidies to capital expenditure, especially in the last 7 years, became out of sync with the historical value. So we have to fix the economy. When you have an economy that has structural problems and you sit down, you know you have a broken computer in front of you and you have your tools and you are fixing, you open it up and you take a good overview of what is wrong inside. That's what we have to do. So the Minister of Finance addressed fuel subsidy. In parallel, and I fully agree with Dr. Tiwari, he has to find a way to address the domestic supply of food. Now, we won't be able to address the entire spectrum of food products. But there are some food products that we can influence that we produce here. What is the strategy for increasing that aspect? And because if you influence the parts of the equation in which you have control over, you would still get some degree of change in the output. What we are not doing, I heard the former Minister of Agriculture make some announcement about 50,000 seedlings being given out to housing. I mean, we need 5 million to be given out over in a structured way with a structured plan. We need to rebuild the subculture of agriculture at the micro level, at the household level. And so we need broad spectrum planning. But what sometimes slows the process is the politicking. So the Minister of Finance is not wrong in identifying the growth in nominal GDP. 170 billion, so be it. But what he didn't say is that the inflation rate between 2008 and 2021, basically the price level basically doubled. So you have so many other things that are not commented on or not being fixed that it leaves you with lopsided interventions. And my view is we need to fix this economy just like with the IMF structural adjustment program. That's what I believe. I believe it was INAO who implemented that structural adjustment program in the late 1980s. And look at the facts, it worked. The Trinidad and Tobago economy from, in my understanding of the facts, from 1992, 93 to about 2004 was built on those narrow policies. And we need to therefore take a holistic approach. But the small politicking about GDP is almost back to 170 billion, which is close to the peak it was ever. What do you think the lay person would be thinking? They would be thinking, well, if we are back to the highest per capita GDP before or close to, things nice. So money would start to flow, as was said earlier, in one form or the other. This economy is not in that position. It is not. And Dr. Tiwari and Karen, they are quite correct in saying it's singularly because of the increase in the price of oil and the price of gas, because if you watch the production, you would see they are depressed. And also because of our one-off intervention, the building of the Cassia platform, which I suspect, Karen, and I'm going to guess here because you only now said it and I didn't get a chance to check. I suspect the economic bulletin of the central bank in January used second quarter and first quarter data for 2021. But the minister was commenting on third quarter data. So I think that's the little difference there, because I checked the data myself. I'm very careful about these things, and it did increase. And 89% of the 5.5 billion, 89%, the increase in the construction sector, was 89% between quarter 2 and quarter 3. Trade and repairs, which is basically wholesale and distribution, was 29%. So 24%. So those are the two main sectors that led to the 5.5 billion increase. But as I always point out to people, if Dr. Tiwari has a car with 4 doors and closes the 4 doors, or closes 3 doors, then, and tomorrow he brings people to go into the car, then when he opens his door and they open another door. That's 2 doors open. By virtue of opening up the economy from being closed, so you had the car in the garage or whatever, more doors would open. So saying that growth today, when the economy is open, is higher than growth yesterday when the economy was closed, I'm not sure how to interpret that. Because if you are not in your car, the 4 doors would be closed. Yeah. And if you go into the car, you would open 2 doors. So it's tautological. I hope that is a simple example, but I hope it makes sense.
Well, Dr. Hussain, you sent us in a graph with regards to different ways to measure growth. And we do have it, if it could be put up on the screen, because I'm wondering if part of what you're trying to explain includes some of the different ways that GDP and growth could be reported, as you're on the topic.
Of course, if you close the economy, so if you have 15 businesses in a street and you close 8 businesses, then economic activity, Dr. Tiwari and Karen, is going to be 8 businesses lower. If the next day the pandemic comes to, it tapers off and becomes an endemic, and you go back up to 15 businesses, then you can report in relation to that period when businesses were closed, economic activity today is higher. I don't know that we should spend more than 1 second discussing that, because that's obvious. It's opening back the economy growth.
Dr. Tiwari, your response to what Dr. Hussain was indicating.
Listen, I know we're coming to the end of the program, and I don't want to spend my time just criticizing what the government is doing. I would like to make some positive suggestions. The first thing is that we have a food crisis in the world because of all the things that we know, from war to the consequences after the COVID pandemic with logistics and trade and supply chains, etc. So I would think that the first thing that we'd want to do is to have a serious food and hunger policy, because we have a problem with both. And secondly, we would want to look at the inputs into the rest of the production process, from agriculture to manufacturing, agro-processing to manufacturing, and try and address that in terms of import substitution. So that would be the first thing. Secondly, I think we would want to address the issue of export production, because we need to earn more foreign exchange outside of the energy sector. And I would think that in order to do that, you have to build economic confidence. And you cannot have economic confidence if you are making haphazard decisions, if you are not putting it in context, if you do not have a medium-term plan or a medium-term fiscal framework, and if you do not have a situation in which businesses can feel guaranteed that if they invest, they are really talking about a growing economy at home and an export trust for the country externally. Now, the third thing I would do is that since we have a problem with debt and that limits our capacity for fiscal space and address and challenges our foreign exchange situation because of the balance of payments and balance of trade situation, I would think that you want to pull in all the financial sector institutions internationally that are connected with us, whether it's the IMF, the World Bank, CAF, IDB, etc., CDB, and you want to have a discussion with them, and you want to have a discussion simultaneously with the rating agencies to see how we could manage that external space, manage the debt and the debt repayment issue, and maybe with some rescheduling. And I would also want to see how that would then impact on what I can do in developmental terms for the economy. The other thing that I would want to do is to get into a serious housing program and not necessarily driven by the state. The state has a lot of land which they can make available. Let the private sector do it. Put limits on the cost of the housing so it's available to the taxpayer. And the reason why housing is so important is because it addresses the issue of equity and inequality and home ownership, property ownership. And we have a serious housing problem in Trinidad and Tobago, and the government has not been able to satisfy it well. So if we were able to do that, you would also need, with the confidence in the economy, the focus on the supply side of development here in Trinidad and Tobago and the growth trajectory, you'll be able to get people who are getting their houses to have jobs so that they can pay their mortgages. And you develop an entire group of people who are not now central to the economic and financial system. You bring them into the system in a way that helps them to make themselves sustainable. And then finally, what I would do is to make an intervention that does not allow the rest of the world, the competitive sectors of the world, to run away from us and leave us behind with digitalization and digitization. And as a consequence, what I would do is I would get that done well and very pointedly. I would look like the industry at the industries we have here that are connected to that, like robotics. We have a successful robotics company in Trinidad and Tobago, hiring the graduates from the University of the West Indies. I would try to link that to the digital economy abroad in terms of automation at home, automation abroad, robotics, artificial intelligence, metaverse developments, etc., so that while we are doing the internal problems of restructuring the economy for export growth, we are also taking a leap into the new economy that is emerging and will emerge after all of these problems are over, because the problems will be over eventually and we'll have to go to recovery. And I would simply like to suggest those things. And I mean, the government needs to think differently. I think they are caught up in warp thinking of 20 and 30 years ago. And I really feel that they cannot take us anywhere.
Karen, we have yes, Karen, we have about 5 minutes left. Let me just say this,
that all of what both Dr. Tiwari and Dr. Sain have both said has a lot of merit. The problem is we have to look at the reality of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And one of the issues is, and has been said over and over again, I don't know. I read the IMF, the part that Dr. Hussain said he didn't look at. So I just read the literature on it, and it wasn't bad. It wasn't it was fairly balanced. But what I do think that the problem is in Trinidad is the issue of implementation. How many committees, how many boards have been brought together from the very beginning? The Economic Advisory Board lasted a year and a half or thereabouts. Then the one looking at the problems of the inner city, Laventille, and so on, COVID-19. How many of them? I don't know if any of these studies have actually been implemented. What I do know is that we still don't have a National Statistical Institute. What I do know is that act, that is the Procurement Act, daily needs to be challenged with Section 7. And I would love a group to challenge that as the meaning of any other agreement. What I do know is that even when we're talking about the housing and the need for housing, yes, the TTMF does give support for houses under $1 million. And the what you pay in to the government when you purchase property, they've reached it up to the $850,000. You pay no taxes. But what I would like to see is more involvement of the small, medium enterprise, that a slice of the business be given to them and deliberately so, because this is a government of the people. And what one is seeing is the public-private partnerships. Who has the land? Who has the ability to enter into those arrangements? It's only those who have the money. And what I am saying is, as we move forward, whilst your inflation is telling you your purchasing power has been significantly reduced, and the indications are that you're not going to get a significant increase in salaries, and that we have a refinery that cannot seem to be restarted, mainly because of the number of bonds that or debt it has on it, that the government needs to do what other governments have done. And you, Dr. Tawari, I remember being on a show years ago when you were talking about not about digitalization, but you were talking about the same issue of us getting, developing opportunities for export market. Look at our foreign exchange reserves. You're saying it's 6.9 or 6.8 or thereabouts, about there. But how much of that is earned from export? So much of that is from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. So much of that is from an issuing of a bond. So much of that is from the special drawing rights. So we have to get the act together to implement and understand that our responsibility is not only to the wealthy, but to the whole of the people who make up this country. Because guess what, Dr. Hussain? You see the subsidy they remove from fuel, they might have to put the subsidy somewhere else. Well, because people can't eat.
Well, Karen, I do apologize to have to interrupt you there. What we're going to do now, folks, we're going to just break for news on the hour here on WESN, and when we return, we'll continue with this morning's program. Stay tuned with us.
Seven is out, all day is in. WESN News on the hour.
Every day, we communicate through stories. Stories of ourselves, our challenges, our goals, our experiences, and our aspirations. Storytelling is an art that we have mastered. WESN Film Studios comprises a collaborative team of experts with extensive industry experience locally, regionally, and internationally. The ability of your business to successfully communicate with your preferred audience depends on the strength of the stories you tell. Your vision should be communicated in a high-quality, professional, and creative way. concept to post-production, advertising to film, multi-camera productions, live events, streaming and virtual conferencing. We are WESN Film Studio. Let your own unique voice be heard and your vision realized. Call us today at 628-5835 for your next production.
In this season, we talk more about health, wellness, and everything in between. I am so excited to share with you everything about health and wellness so that you can design the life that you've always dreamed of. Join me here on What's Up Doc.
What's Up Doc? Tuesdays and Thursdays here on WESN, Content Capital.
Join me, Sule A. Joseph, as I delve into the day-to-day psychological issues plaguing our society. We will discuss behaviors that encompass the biological influences, social pressures, and environmental factors that affect how you think, act, and feel. Sight, Thursdays at 11:30 a.m. only on WESN, Content Capital.
I am Rondell Donowa, attorney at law and host of Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Strictly Legal is a legal program geared towards informing you, the public, of your legal rights, responsibilities, and remedies. So be viewing Thursdays 10 a.m. to 10:30 a.m.
AM Prime on WESN, the only place from 6 to 7:30 a.m. where you can get the most analytical and thorough interviews and regional reports.
The Barbados Labour Party, led by the Prime Minister Mia Amor-Motley, once again able to achieve a clean sweep in yesterday's general election.
I think a lot of people have underestimated the power of Tobago nationalism.
If the government is afraid to say it, I, Martin George, I am saying it this morning on your show, Andy, there will be no carnival before Ash Wednesday.
Grab a cup of coffee and start your day right watching AM Prime with Andy Johnson weekdays from 6 a.m. only on your Content Capital, WESN.
Discussion that greater attention must be paid to the country's social security situation. Should public servants remain on the job until they are 65? Would employers and employees be required to increase their contributions to national insurance? And will the National Insurance Board have to increase the benefits to retired persons who paid into the system? What's your view on the subject? WESN Content Capital will host a live panel discussion this Thursday with NIB's former chairman Michael Toney and Dr. Jennifer Rouse, former head of Division of Aging at the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. We invite you to be a part of this riveting discussion. Join host Andy Johnson from 7:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. on Thursday for a lively and informative discussion on this critical issue, only on WESN Content Capital.
We have been apart for a long time. Now let's get together once again. Let's welcome you back. Family. North Coast Jazz 2022, May 27th to 29th. Born here, played here.
Welcome back to Talking Point here on WESN. Now, off air, Dr. Tiwari and Dr. Hussain unfortunately had other meetings to attend, so they are no longer with us, but we do thank them for their time and their opinion, and I can assure you that they will be back on the program very soon because time certainly went by very quickly and there was a lot more to unpack. So we'll just leave this as part one of the discussion for now. Now, Karen, Sean, and myself, we had a brief discussion off air while the news was being aired, but we will make those points very shortly because we'll open up the phone lines now, 623-9376, 622-9338. There is a caller on the line with us from Pity Valley. Good morning, caller.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Sean and Keaton.
Good morning.
And
morning.
I'm glad Karen didn't left This question is for Karen. Short, simple. Very short and simple. Should the government keep the subsidy and kick the can down the road again, just like property tax? Yes or no? Very simple. For Karen.
No, I think they should start the removal of the fuel subsidy, because at the end of the day, it affects your revenue and an ability of the government to do other things that can help to turn around the economy. And I think, just to answer, as I said to Sean and Keaton off air, I said, when we have all our family living in the States, and when you see the price they're paying for gas, I don't think anybody's going to want to complain to paying TT $1. What it's going to do is going to have an impact on the rest of the economy. So I agree with it, but I think the government should have planned for other opportunities for creating employment for people who would be most affected.
Right, I think...
Was that the question? Another question? Was there another question?
I think the caller would have heard, hopefully caller, you heard Karen's answer while you were off air. But just as we await other phone calls, because I can hear the line ringing, very quickly, one of the concerns that we mentioned is in relation to transfers and subsidies. And when we look at what the government is doing, I think what has been subjective is the timing. Now, as pointed out, there will always be a debate about that, exactly when is the right time. And that essentially was my first reaction. I don't think this was necessarily the right time. But that's from a layman, that's from a journalist point of view. That's not necessarily from the economic perspective. What we can expect, though, is that at any point in time soon, we will not see government cutting social expenditure, social welfare. At least I think it's fair and safe to make that assumption.
Right. So just before we bring in the next caller, so yes, the fuel subsidy, it is a help, but it helps across the board, rich and poor. And I think my initial reaction or my response as someone who had some outrage was that, well, look, if you reduce the fuel subsidy, you spread the burden across the board, and it allows you now to still have money for more targeted subsidies to help those in need, as opposed to having something that is just blanket across.
Which is why we may actually see more expenditure in relation to social
The flip side is it all comes back to what Karen said, implementation. And you could argue that the fuel subsidy was easy to implement and it affected the economy in multiple trickle-down effects that removing that now does make the situation more complicated.
Certainly. Well, we do have a caller on the line with us from Chaguanas. Good morning, caller.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, Mrs. Tishara, perhaps you can assist me with my opinion. I hold the view that as an important nation, we send revenue out for everything we import. So therefore, it is very difficult to terminate subsidies because we do not have the revenue to replace the subsidy as if we were an if we were exporting country, where we would be generating revenues that we could remove subsidies and substitute it with the revenue we are generating. So the other thing is, with that being said, increase in price doesn't affect corporate Trinidad one iota. All they do is they increase their expenses on their books, and their revenue less their expenses reflects in their tax liability, which is a savings to corporate Trinidad because they pay less tax, which offsets the expenditure for any increase. The same goes with construction. When you have the transfers to fund development projects, and you have the contributions from the multilateral lending agencies, and these days they have very little grants. This money is expended through contracts. And one thing about contracts in the construction industry, the tendered price is 28 days prior to the latest date for receiving the tender. And any increase in price is paid back to the contractors. They make claims for it and they get back the money. So price increase in gasoline wouldn't affect construction contractors. They will get back all that money in their claims. And the impact of any gas increase on anything in the industry, they will get it back as claims. So when we hemming and hawing here, a lot of people, a wide cross-section of the country is not going to feel the effect of gas price because a lot of people who get salaries with perks that give electric vehicles and gas, they will just be using gas without feeling the effect of any increase in gas. Especially a lot of these state companies, a lot of the energy companies who are being remunerated disproportionately to what the economy is today. At the time when the economy was prospering, I have no problem with what they were being remunerated with. And yesterday I spoke to you on a radio program in which I expressed my view, and you said that that is not an area you want to touch. But that is an area that is very, very bad in this country right now. It is draining the economy. The Treasury is paying tremendous wages and salaries for disproportionate earnings to people who think that they deserve that kind of salaries. It is no longer appropriate. So,
all right, Kola.
Okay, but I wouldn't.
Kola, thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Keaton.
Thank you very much. No, Karen. Well, we do have another call on the line, but I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to respond to the caller with.
No, I just was going to say he's right about the import and that we should reduce our import. And the other thing is that he says a lot of people are not going to affect them. Is a lot more people will be affected. And I think that's the issue. It's those people which make up a large percentage of our population are going to be affected by the trickle-down effect of the increase. So the bottom line is implementation and finding means and ways to provide employment for those and meaningful employment and meaningful business opportunities for the small and medium enterprise.
Hence why I said that it's complicated. It's easy to have a fuel subsidy to implement, right? But one thing though, when he said that subsidies are necessary because we don't have the revenue from exports, technically subsidies are just eating up government revenue. And government revenue is usually considered better spent on infrastructure, development, capital expenditure, and maintenance.
In other words, an investment.
Right, investments.
No, but that's not fair though.
No,
all countries, whether they're England with the dole, or whether with America with the welfare system, whether Norway, Sweden, all developed countries that score high on Human Development Index, all provide some sort of subsidies for those who cannot, will not, shall not work. So I don't think we should say
but we're talking about subsidies
I
on
don't
goods.
agree with that at
We're
all.
talking about subsidies on goods with regards to trying to help our balance
All
and
right,
trade.
Sean, Karen, you're going to have to pause on that. I have a point to make on exports and imports, the cost of that, but I will do after this because we do have a call on the line from Shogunas. Good morning, caller.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Morning.
I listened to Dr. Hussain very carefully, and I hope you did, because all these things that he said you have to research, I have given you that answer on numerous occasions. How you do this in government is through the annual administrative reports, where each ministry recap their performance, and you have things like interministerial committee which will deal with these problems. And now Dr. Hussain may not know this because he's not a public servant, he's a lecturer in the university, but at least you all should have known the amount of times I told you that. On the subsidy problem, the question, as I have repeatedly said, is whether the thing is being over-subsidized. That creates abuse. If you look at any of our neighbors except Venezuela, you will see that fuel in Trinidad is very, very cheap. Not only that, a lot of people from surrounding places come here to barter and they buy our subsidized fuel and carry it back. Any question, gentlemen, or you wait till I finish to make them?
Actually, I have no response to what you're stating. I don't think anybody does. So have a good day, caller. Keep well. We have a caller on the line from San Fernando. Good morning. Hello, good morning, caller.
Caller, you're live on here.
All right, okay. Caller, good morning.
Hello, morning.
Hi, good morning.
Morning to Mr. Shearer and you guys. Yeah, hello, morning.
You're live, we can hear you.
Don't listen to the TV, listen to the phone.
Okay, great, no problem. Two quick questions here. Sean, Mr. Shearer, the concern, the percentage of people living below the poverty line currently.
Exactly.
Yeah, the percentage of people living below the poverty line currently in Trinidad and Tobago, and how the subsidy will affect this particular group is something we need to be careful with. One. Two, there are so many people, charities and NGOs, that every day they are trying to feed people and clothe people and help people across the country. Is unbelievable. So now that you have the gas price going to rise, this group of people are just sent children to school. Some of them are single parents, and this group in particular is going to be highly affected. So that is one area of concern. I heard Mr. Tiwari say something very particular just now about getting involved in robotics and digitalization and things of this nature. The University of the West Indies have produced so many people out of the university, natural sciences, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any, like Silicon Valley in California, is there some specified area that the country could look at in terms of exporting services or products out of that? Because forget the refinery, that's gone. We can't think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Forget Caroni, that's gone. So all these things were cash cows for governments past and present.
Mm-hmm.
Those things are gone. So now the government must look forward and they must try to think about what is futuristic to market Trinidad and Tobago on that level. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
My one thing with regards to the arguments of below the poverty line, it comes back to what I believe Dr. Hossain and Dr. Tiwari said. There will always be people below the poverty line.
Well, just to give you some statistics.
And it will always be a problem for those people below the poverty line.
Just to share some statistics with you, because I don't want to make that point on imports and exports, but according to a 2020 UN report, 0.6% of our population, or roughly 9,000 people, are multi-dimensionally poor. An additional 3.7% are considered as vulnerable, which is about 51,000 people.
The point that they were trying to make, and the point that I'm trying to make, is that in the long run, the situation is not very practical and tenable. So you're going to have to do something about it. And unfortunately, we might come to the point where we ourselves have a hard time being able to afford all of the safety nets that we have. And this could be the government saying, we can't afford all of them, we could only afford some of them. This might be the least efficient one. Maybe it's not. Maybe it is one of the more efficient ones, and the decision they made on which to cut is incorrect.
We have a caller on the line from Jacob Martin. Good morning, caller.
Hi guys, everyone. Thanks. Good morning.
Good morning.
Very informative discussion. Thanks to your panel. So yesterday we briefly touched on the Prime Minister's diversification plan 5 budget support. But regarding now these ideas, we've listened to Dr. Hossain and Dr. Tiwari for years now. I commend Dr. Hossain's initiative, his food drive. But ideas are wonderful, but in order to implement anything necessary for the development of our nation, any nation, we have to put people first. That means interventions that change people's behavior. So we have to understand why people make certain choices, for example, with their health or with their food, just briefly. We need to understand their constraints in accessing and using services, things like that. So acknowledging people's decision-making process is crucial. It helps to introduce measures to address the demand side of the behavior to complement the supply-driven interventions in an attempt to affect meaningful, lasting change, which is what we want. So behavior change, culture change, work ethic, all critical. Thanks. Great interview. Bye.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you. To that point, no, I go back to the report by the IMF earlier this year. One of the things that stood out to me was in relation to our real exchange rate. And it said that it was overvalued. Right now, the Minister of Finance responded stating that they have no intentions, that is Cabinet and himself do not have any intentions of actually devaluing our currency. And that's something that has been debated as well for quite some time. But when we take a look at it, I'm a bit concerned because an overvalued currency, it means that the currency is actually too high for the state of the economy. And basically what it does is that it tends to make exports look relatively more expensive and imports cheaper. So what it does is that it actually stifles domestic demand. It reduces domestic demand and it encourages expenditure on imported products. Now this is seen mostly when an economy is considered as sluggish. And that is where it's a bit of concern, because an overvalued exchange rate also furthers deflationary pressures. So just based off that report was in January. Now, that report also stated that we'll see tremendous recovery in 2022. Fingers crossed that happens. So I'm not saying that it's an issue that we need to necessarily focus on now, and I'm not saying it's an issue that we need to push. But I'm stating what we have to take a look at is our finances, our economics within the coming year, the coming fiscal year. And even what's more important is we also need to, I'm keenly awaiting the mid-year budget review before we can further debate this particular topic in relation to the exchange rate. But that is where my concern, I really had some concerns when reading that report from the IMF.
623-9376, 622-9338. Call in. We might be able to take one more call, maybe two if you call in quick. Karen, I don't know if you want to add to
just
that.
quickly, one of the reasons that there has been pushback against devaluation is that we talk about increasing our imports. The problem is that most of the inputs for your imports are imported into the country. So that
exports,
unless we change the kinds of things that we are exporting, reducing the value and making it more, our goods cheaper, which is what is one of the things for people to buy your product, it is not going to help significantly, because they still have to import the tin cans, the whatever they're using to repackage stuff. And that has been a major consideration.
When the pandemic started, I said this will be a good opportunity for anybody that can make something. But the key is to not do what Karen, to do what Karen said, to not be importing your inputs.
Well,
that just kind of
interesting enough. I remember you and I spoke about it multiple times, especially during the pandemic. We do have a call on the line with us from San Fernando. Good morning, caller.
Hey, gentlemen, and Karen, morning.
Good morning.
Great session. I hope you have a part 2 planned.
We do.
A lot to unpack, so I will just focus on one thing this morning, agricultural sector. And you know, I think, okay, people have to start to change. One of the things that has to happen for this thing to change is we have to start to change the way we behave, change our taste, because this food inflation is driven by our taste, you know. That increase in foreign exchange or food imports is increased by our taste.
Well, one thing though, unfortunately, the way how things are, a lot of foreign foods are cheaper than the local alternative.
It actually has always been cheaper than the local alternative.
I would tend to disagree a bit. I go to the market, and over a period of time, I had deliberately changed the way that I prepared food and cooked food for my kids to change their taste, which it took some time. Huh?
No, well, I don't doubt your point.
But, so no, let me get quickly to before my time run out, Sean. And the issue is we also have to target certain items, because I keep hearing about fixing agriculture, but we have to start to target some items that we import. Look, guys, we importing bananas.
Yeah.
We importing bananas that we can grow here. I buy local bananas. We started to import cabbage, and we started importing cauliflower.
We import
that have been grown in Trinidad and Tobago.
We import provisions. We import avocado. We import seasoning.
So we have to start to target, and we could take a book, a page or 2 or 3 out of the Jamaican book for that. Thank you very much.
And I just want to say, with regard to that, it must be driven from the Minister of Agriculture, because they have the ability to pull all the pieces together and do it, and have people like yourself being part of a committee and implement. And if that's what the Ministry of Agriculture with agro-industry is willing to do, which they have not yet implemented after all these years, I mean, I've heard this so many times. Keaton and Sean are much younger than I, but I'm sure they've heard this story before.
we certainly have. But folks, that is where we close the phone lines for this morning. Thank you very much to all our callers for their contributions.
Just to go back to the food conversation though. Yes, I understand that taste do matter, because the amount of foreign fast food brands that make a mint here. And there was a time, I think, when I was a child, that was not the trend. It was still trying to find its way to penetrate TNT's market. I will say this, the food is cheaper, right? And that's in part because we haven't tried to have a production on the levels to give us economies of scale to compete. But chicken is cheaper. Right now, I'm sure a lot of those vegetables and produce, the reason why is because with our current level of production, it's cheaper. And agriculture is one of those areas where we could potentially do it here.
Yes,
when we
but
potentially don't need to have at least as much inputs from abroad to do it here. That's one of the reasons why it's so important.
What people tend to forget as well is what falls under agriculture is ruminant farming as well. And one of the things that amazes me is that even though it is small and comparable to what we locally produce, we still import chicken on a weekly basis. And to me, that was one of the most amazing things.
Can I just say one last thing on that? Because I think it's important to see this. And I may have said it already. Holland, which is 224 times smaller than the United States, have used all the technology, all the greenhouse, everything, and they're the second largest exporter of food in the world. So size does not matter. What you need is the correct technology, the correct guidance, and that is the job of the Ministry of Agriculture.
And what did Holland do?
What did Holland do to become where they are?
Exactly. And Holland invested, not only for themselves, but they're exporting.
Invested. And this is the thing. We slowly could become another example of what not to do with oil money. And this is why we need to,
What you mean, become another? We kind of are an example already.
Well, right. You're right. But back to your point, there are pros and cons. According to Guyana.
Keaton, according to Guyana.
There are pros and cons to letting the currency devaluate. One of the problems would be certain critical imports, maybe you could say pharmaceuticals might become a lot more expensive. The flip side is it would definitely help kickstart, it would give further incentive to produce food locally.
Certainly. Well, folks, that's all the time we have. As you can see, we're all trying to get in our last word, but there is no more time. There was a lot to unpack, a lot to analyze, but as I mentioned, this was part one. We will have a part two very soon. Stay tuned to Talking Point. Tomorrow's edition of the program is going to be a special one. Again, a 1 hour long discussion when we try to assess the first quarter of 2022, not from the financial and economic standpoint, but more so from a social and political view. So, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Once more, I thank our guest, Karen Nestor, who was with us via Zoom. It's always a pleasure having you on the program. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Yes, it was a pleasure. I mean, you had wonderful guests who I happen to interact with personally and have a lot of respect for. Not to say that I don't have that for you and Sean. Absolutely.
No. I'm just making sure. I'm glad you slipped it in there last minute, Karen. Sean, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure. And as it goes, it's always a lot to unpack in the time that we have.
Yeah, I think we do need to come to terms with the fact that there isn't everything to spread around. So it's not that we shouldn't ask the government to do a better job, but we can't ask the government to try and do everything.
But I would just simply say in concluding, today is a good day to have a good day. But with all this discussion, my favorite line from one local company, which probably holds true to the conversation this morning, is the local something that makes it all taste better.
So today is a good day to do something for yourself.
Exactly, folks. Have a great one, and we'll see you again tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.